Hello students, I am Dr. Ilke Das, Assistant Professor of Sociology at the Department of HSS IIT Roorkee. Welcome to another lecture of the NPTEL course Power and Politics in Contemporary India, a Sociological View. In this lecture, which happens to be the penultimate lecture of this entire course, we'll discuss why is it necessary for us to decolonize political sociology or political theory as well as sociological theory. The reason I'm saying it is that when we started off with this course, if you remember or if you go back, remember what were the theorists we started off with. We started off with theorists like Marx, theorists like Weber, and similar kind of theorists. And was Marx Indian? Was Weber Indian? Was Durkheim Indian? Was Bourdieu Indian? As a matter of fact, none of them were Indians or from the global south. They were white men from developed countries. But why is it necessary for us to rethink what was there, what they wrote, and why this rethinking also needs to have a decolonizing ideology as well as decolonizing structure? Does that mean that we are going to throw the baby with the bathwater? The answer is no, and this no is in capital letters. And in this lecture and in the next lecture, we'll discuss how we can rethink political sociology and why this is the best time to do so. Now, one of the significant reasons that we need to rethink political sociology or decolonize it is because there are certain founding myths. One of the founding myths is that sociology developed in the West. Second, the founding myth is that sociology was created as a subject, as a discipline, as a way of understanding social world by white men. Now, why I'm calling it myth? It is a myth because when Europe studied, it studied itself. So look at Marx and the dominant the dominant nature of his entire corpus. You'd find that except some places here and there, he has only spoken about either Germany, France, England, sometimes America. Take out the work of Max Weber. Same thing, except when he is creating contrasts between the German society and the non-German societies, the Protestant or Christian Protestantism and other religions. And in each one of them, he is also projecting that the West is more civilized, the West is more liberal, West is more rational than the rest. Third, importantly, the same goes with Durkheim because he is also following the same thing or the same process, because they are all speaking about their own societies in reference to the colonized societies, and when they're looking back or reflecting on their own societies, they make this distinction that we are still better than the other ones. So abstractions were created during this period through which Europe became the center of the universe. Whatever concepts were developed there, they became universal concepts. And the universalizing nature of those concepts meant that they could not be challenged from the rest of the lands or the rest of the colonized lands. At the same time, when colonialism went to other places, and when colonialism and imperialism went to other parts of the world and new colonies were formed, one aspect that was created was that there was nothing. The Americas were empty, the African continent was empty, the Australian continent was empty, every place was empty except a few people here and there. They were not civilized, there were no civilizations. The same thing was used in the name of theory building. There is no theory building, or there was no capability or there is no capability of theory building if we are not located in the global north or the dominant lands of the global north. That is the reason why the experiences of Europe, America, or the Anglo-Saxon cultures became the dominant ways through which theory was understood, through which the sociology was understood, through which economics was understood, through which politics was understood. And hence, political sociology, the way it had its origin in the 70s and 80s, also followed the same path. And this following was challenged by the, the anti-globalization and anti-metropolitan biases. Why did they challenge them? They challenged because they claimed that this kind of centralization of Euro-American examples completely overshadow the non-metropolitan thinkers. And when they are overshadowing non-metropolitan thinkers, that means a greater mass of this society, or the greatest number of people in the society have no representation in the way theory has been constructed, in the way concepts are being conceptualized. So certain way of rethinking theory building was institutionalized in the name of Southern theory. And in this course, in a majority of the cases, we have dealt with Southern theory, in which we have tried to make a distinction between periphery as data and center as theory hierarchies, which essentially means that the center or the global north provides theory and concepts. We from the global south, we provide data. And when theory from north and data theory from north and data from south, when they come together, that is when a research item is produced. Now, what if we do not follow this hierarchy? If we do not follow this hierarchy, that means we are saying that when theory is produced in north, data should also come from north. When theory or data is produced in the south, theory should also be produced in the south. Or our reflections on our society should create conditions for understanding our own uniqueness as well as the generalities. So, Southern theory demands, and I am using this word demand very carefully, demands intellectual humility, comparative engagement, and recognition of global epistemic diversity. Somebody sitting in a college or in a university in Canada or in Germany cannot create a theory on what is happening in South India. They have to come here, live here, experience what is happening here, and then do it. Now, what is the entire principle? What is this problematic that I'm discussing here? Now, let me take you to something that some might consider controversial, but within the periphery of, within the rubric of Southern theory, it is not so controversial. The aspect here is that white men and Brahmins, white men across the world and Brahmins in South Asia can work on any topic, can create theories, can go to any place because everything is open for them, whereas it's not the other way around. Now, let me elaborate on this and why I'm calling it a little controversial. I'm calling it controversial because given the situation now, some might say that I'm being racist by saying that by pointing out white men. What if now white men, when they come to the periphery, non-white places, they are targeted because what I have said? And what if, and the other side of the story is that what if I am branded as a casteist because I am calling out Brahmins in specific and pointing out at a caste. Now, keep aside the so-called controversial part of my statement. The non-controversial and accepted part of the statement is that the white and the Brahmins represent the global north. They're not communities or individuals. White comes from the notion of white comes from the dominant perspectives that are coming from Western Europe and Northern America, where whites predominant, where institutions governed, ruled by them predominant. Secondly, whites, when they create theories or concepts, they create universalizing kind of or universal theories or so-called universal theories and concepts. So again, what we see here is a form of domination plus hegemony on global academia. Can you question them? Yes, you can question them. Can you negate them? Yes, you can negate them. Can you ignore them? No, you cannot ignore them. Why? Because almost all the journals which are published, whether in social sciences, natural sciences, humanities, or engineering, they are published by these countries, by the people who are governing these places or who are owning these the corporate firms. So in the global south, we can only follow what they are saying. We cannot question them and ignore them. If we can ignore them at our own peril. Because when we write something, for example, I'm writing a research paper, unless and until I'm writing it to the test of the people who are residing, or the white men and women or white scholars who are residing in these places in the global north, it will not be published. If it gets published, then I will say that I will be accused of being a regionalist. That means I'm providing a case study and not using global literature. Global literature essentially means that I'm not citing the white men and women of these institutions who are located at Oxford University, Cambridge University, Harvard, or many of these places. So interestingly, that is because it's the white men, and I'm saying white men again and again, not because I'm a racist, but because that is how it is being done. Most of the professors or academicians that you find are white men, and you can count the white women there on your fingertips. Most often than not, they are not as widely recognized as white men. And second important thing is that being located in India, I cannot, well, theoretically I can, but practically I cannot go to these white developed countries and do a research on a topic that is suitable, that is pertaining to these people. But if you go through any literature, you will find that the white men and women from the global north, they come to India, they go to all the places around the globe which were their ex-colonies and working on those places. So my access to their sites is next to impossible. The funny incident here is that sociologists, anthropologists, political economists, political sociologists, you can be anybody here in India. But the moment you go to America, you all become anthropologists, not sociologists, not anthropologists, not political scientists, or anything else, because that is how they're treating you. Sociology is the study of modern industrial societies. Anthropology is the study of pre-modern or traditional developing societies or underdeveloped societies. Because we are studying our own society, so we cannot do sociology. So if we cannot do sociology or we cannot do political theory, that means we cannot do the political theory or political sociology. That is the reason why it's a domination of certain groups of people, certain characteristic of certain groups of people that makes it white. Because white washing is completely obliterates what is beneath it, the contradictions, the differences, and hierarchies that is there. In the Indian context, as I said, I might be branded a casteist because I uttered that word about Brahmins. The same thing is followed up here because a Brahmin male can go to any place within India, can pick up any topic within India and work on it. He will have access to, and nowadays some Brahmin females, they have access to all the places, all the households, all the topics. The reverse doesn't work that way because somebody who is from a so-called lower caste or Dalits, when the upper caste or the Savarnas or the Dvija castes, when they don't even eat from the others' hands, how do you think they will be allowed into the houses of upper caste, and that to sit with the women of these upper caste households and conduct research or take their time? So this is not about Brahmin versus non-Brahmin, it's an ideological standpoint which is about purity and pollution, which is about accessibility, and which is about how do we conceptualize our own society. And unless and until we do so, we cannot decolonize it, because decolonization is not just about fighting against the whites, it's also about our internal hierarchies. So Southern theory, in a way, challenges both of them. It challenges the hierarchy that has been created between global north and global south, but at the same time, it also challenges the local epistemologies while grounding itself to the local epistemologies. So the diversity of opinions, the diversity of examples, and the diversity of experiences matter. If you're more interested in how local epistemologies or local experiences or personal experiences can be theorized, read the Gopal Guru and Sundar Sarukai's co-written book, The Cracked Mirror. And if you're more interested, you can also pick up articles of both of them and look at them. Brilliantly elaborated and brilliantly described as to how experiences matter. Unless and until we look at those experiences, it is nigh impossible to decolonize. And it started off from the 1980s with the work of subaltern studies, because subaltern studies worked against the grain by recovering concealed voices within elite authored documents. And they did it so, as we have been discussing throughout this course, by trying to subvert, politicize the way everything was understood, everything is being understood by the dominant elite authored works. Why the elites show or wrote something the way they wrote? And if they have written it, how can we reconfigure it? How can we deconstruct it? And what would be the process of reconstruction? One of the key figures in this was Gayatri Spivak, when she argued, can the subaltern speak? And if the subaltern cannot speak, then we have to look at who the subaltern is. So the subaltern is somebody who is at the bottom of the hierarchy, the most marginalized ones. But this subaltern is also about situational, relational, and historically contingent identities. So the subaltern in general cannot speak, but when they can speak, it has to be through this process and this process alone. So while she was theorizing the Indian society, Dipesh Chakrabarty thought, let us go back and provincialize the universalizing figures. So he argues that let us provincialize Europe itself, not America or others. Let us provincialize Europe and tell them that the Western society, the Western civilization, and the Western idea of knowledge system itself is not universal. Rather, it is located in the specific experiences that the Europeans had, both in their own society as well as in relationship with the colonies. So, the time that they are speaking about, we have to categorize and reorganize the historical time. And through that, what we can do is we can emphasize on the heterogeneity of political rationalities, the shaping subaltern resistance, and alternative viewpoints. One of the subaltern studies scholar by the name David Hardiman wrote a very interesting piece of work by the name Subaltern Medicinal Practices. And he argues that the shamans as well as others or the Adivasis, when they practice something and we call it superstition, it is not their superstitions. Rather, they have their reasons and rationalities why they have been doing so. And when they are doing it, it is interesting and it is important that we look at the reasonings that they are giving. Once we look at their reasoning, then we would get to know how they're making those reasons. It's not just about you put two elements together to make a compound. It's more than that. It's the worldview that they have, and these worldviews are structured around subaltern resistance. And when we understand the nature of subaltern resistance, we'll also understand what are the alternative viewpoints. Why do they feel that something has to be related to unpleasant behaviors or not able to please the gods or goddesses? There could be a reason for that. So rationality is not one, reason is not one, rather there could be multiple locations for that, multiple variations and variants of that. So let us understand it, and then we can see whether it is superstition, it is reason, rationality, or whatever it is. There cannot be one reason. So we need to understand and need to bring to the forefront indigenous epistemologies and land-centered ontologies, because land is conceptualized in indigenous thoughts as spiritual, relational, constitutive of social order and not mere economic asset. So when the moment we do so, what we are the experiencing is a revolutionary act of epistemological break, because it completely negates or turns on its head the ideas of primitive and simple societies versus more complex and modern societies. How do we narrate, how do we document oral traditions? How do we document somebody's cosmologies? How do we document somebody's place-based narratives? Because each one of them would challenge the way the Europeans have described others. And all the time the other needs to be civilized, which in a pejorative way it's called the white man's burden. So in this kind of formulation, in the work of Chakrabarty Spivak, particularly Can the Subaltern Speak, she argues that when the white British came here, they positioned themselves as the torch bearers or the pioneers who would save the brown woman from the brown men. So that is one of the ways white man's burden was there. Of course, in later on the period, she said that this was a this could be construed as a highly racist positionality and positioning of somebody's ideas, but she said what she said. So Southern feminisms and intersectional critique creates this environment in which there's no one category of woman, because the moment we say there's a category called woman, then we are not exposing the Brahminical heteronormative biases within mainstream women's movements, or we are not even doing doing proper Southern theory or Southern feminism. At the same time, when we are constructing something called nationalism, democracy, and calling something as subnationalism, and we want to crush it, within the framework of democracy, that means it is problematic. Because according to Sanjay Barua, nation building as a process needs to take into consideration the subnationals or so-called subnational ideas and ideologies and processes. Otherwise, there would not be a difference between the white colonizers and the brown colonizers or the black colonizers. Rather, what we need to do is to position subnationalism as civil rights movements or civil movements for further democratization of the state, for further democratization of polity, as well as for further democratization of the society itself. The moment we try to crush it, then things are not things are bound to be challenged in a crushing manner. And finally, how do we decolonize praxis? We decolonize praxis by re-looking at methods and ethics, as well as being reflexive not just about modernity but also about experiences, sufferings, and alternative knowledges. So, ultimately, what decolonizing praxis, decolonizing theory, decolonizing concepts, as well as decolonizing political sociology means is that it is about creating a globally inclusive social science rooted in mutual learning, justice, and epistemic plurality. So, one of the key questions that I have for you today is, in what ways do subaltern studies and Spivak differ in conceptualizing subaltern voice, and how do indigenous epistemologies challenge universalist political concepts like sovereignty or property? So, these are a few references for you. Thank you.